Did you know that geologists still do not understand or know how mountains are created on Earth? What? What? What are you talking about, you crazy anachronistic affliction dude? What do you mean that geologists do not understand how mountains are built? Of course they do. Right? I can look at Wikipedia right now and it shows two plates coming together, smashing into each other and pushing up Earth. And that is how mountains are built. What are you, stupid? Yes, but that is not the point. Something that I found to be exceedingly interesting when I started to really study, or have to be forced, something I found that was extremely interesting when I was eventually forced to start to learn about geology, because if I didn't know anything about geology, I would not have been able to understand a lot of history. But one of the things that I learned pretty quickly was this odd fact that geologists still do not know exactly how mountains are built. Now, I know that sounds crazy, right? Because we've all been raised with the concept of plate tectonics. Now, it's really important for everybody to understand that plate tectonics, it's just a theory, and that is all that it is. This is where people get lost, because I understand that my claim that scientists, or geologists more specifically, don't understand mountain building, that is not a false claim. This is a scientific fact. Like I just said, the plate tectonics situation, that is nothing but a theoretical idea backed up by, well, I mean, to be honest, backed up by circumstantial evidence at best. One of the problems that we find nowadays in the sciences and the histories is that we find a situation to where people are teaching theories as facts. Right? This is not how science is supposed to be done. And I'm not going to argue with anybody. This is not how we are supposed to approach trying to figure out what is going on around us. We cannot use a theory as a foundation for everything. We just can't do that, but that is exactly what is being done right now. So right now, the vast majority of people, both on the mainstream side and on the alternative research side, most people honestly believe that the plate tectonic theory is real. Why do people believe that a theory is a scientific fact when we know for a fact that we do not have enough evidence, nor do we have enough scientific experimentation, nor do we have a predictive model to support the concept of plate tectonics? Now, the reason why I talk about plate tectonics is because the mountain building theory is based on the theory of plate tectonics. So, by a simple application of critical thinking skills, we can look at plate tectonics and by extension mountain building, and we can look at the scientists who are supporting this theory, and we can imagine choking them out and smashing their head into a wall and then dragging them through a room full of razor blades and thorns and then drinking their blood and then gaining their power. We can imagine this because it is unbelievably frustrating to see mainstream scientists believing in a very makeshift theory, and then of course by extension building all kinds of other garbage theories on top of that foundational theory. I mean, this is the situation that we find ourselves in with respect to science, modern day science. So why are we talking about mountain building and then by extension plate tectonics? What the hell does all of this have to do with disproving the Ice Age? Well, it has everything to disproving the concept of the Ice Age, but another reason why I want to cover these geological occurrences, I guess I'll say, is because a lot of this stuff will be directly related to your historical research. And granted, it'll be more of the ancient historical research, but understanding the real processes that happen on Earth and the processes that create a lot of the situations that we find on this planet is absolutely key. And so if we are going to go and try to figure this stuff out and we are going to use mainstream garbage, we are immediately put at a disadvantage. And the reason for that is simple. The mainstream is wrong. Everybody nowadays believes in plate tectonics and by extension mountain building from plate tectonics for no other reason than they have been psychologically conditioned to do as such. Think about this. Ask yourself a serious question. Pull yourself back, stay objective, look at yourself from a third-person perspective, and ask yourself, why do you believe plate tectonics is a fact? Because it's not, it's a theory. Even mainstream still holds it as a theory. But why do you, or the general population, why does everybody believe that this theory is a fact? And the only answer is simple, and that's because you have been told your entire life that it is a fact. To make matters worse, of course, you have been psychologically conditioned to fear straying outside of this explanation for things like mountain building or, earthquakes, stuff like this. If you think anything else happened, if you think that anything else could have taken place that could have created the geological topography that we see today, you are going to be immediately ridiculed. You are going to be pushed out of the geological department, if you're in one. And basically, you are going to be called a crazy conspiracy theorist simply because you have asked a few questions. And those questions have led you to doubt the theory. And that's all there is to it. So basically, I'm not going to get into the psychological crazy crap on this show. I just always want to remind everybody that for everything that you believe in, there's a really good chance that you only believe in this stuff simply because you were told to believe it your entire life. That's it. That is generally why most people hold the beliefs that they do. If I go ask any normal person out there on the street what makes mountains, well, probably a lot of people would just look at me blankly nowadays, especially okay, I'm not going to get into that either. But if I ask a general person who at least, is semi-educated or whatever, they'll say, well, bro, two plates, they scrape together and then they just push up the mountains over billions of years. And that is how we get the peaks that we see today. That will be the answer. Where did that answer come from? Because I guarantee you that person giving me the answer has never done a single scientific experiment to prove this. They've probably never really read any real geological papers. And that would be papers from not only the mainstream perspective, but also an alternative research perspective. There's a good chance that person who just gave me that answer has never done any real research in their life. They know they can regurgitate the plate situation, the tectonic plate situation, because for them, it makes sense. And it makes sense at a very basic level, interestingly enough. By that, I mean the concept of pushing two objects together with force, right? You're smashing them together, and then eventually what's going to happen in somebody's mind, generally speaking, is they're going to think, yeah, well, as you smash two things together, you would expect to find some sort of buckling. And of course, that buckling would be what pushes up the mountains. And for your average person, that makes sense. There's no one really here on this planet that can't think about that concept, visualize it, and then nod their head in agreement. Because yeah, it sounds like it makes sense. All right, fine. This high-level geologist is telling me that there are these magical plates that the land floats on, and they come together, they smash together, and they build mountains. And your average person will visualize this, and it will make sense at a fundamental level. And then they'll go on with their life, right? They're not going to go and double check this. They are not going to go into the field to try and prove it. They're not going to do any of this. They are going to listen to the experts, right? Nowadays, trust the experts. Yeah, how badly has that bitten every single science in the butt in the past century plus? Like tons, constantly, right? Never listen to the experts. If somebody is an expert, you need to be careful. Because an expert means that person has tunnel vision. By tunnel vision, what I mean is that an expert has essentially dedicated their sole intellectual focus towards one subject. What's wrong with that? Everything is wrong with that. Because the reality of science is this: all sciences legitimately rely on one another to gain a real understanding of whatever scientific process you are trying to figure out. So, for example, you go to study geology. Well, you better also probably start learning some physics as well, because you are going to find that you have to have an understanding of physics, at least at a base level, to really start to begin to understand anything you are seeing geologically. I mean, and that's why geophysicists exist. There's literally an entire other science for that. So if you're a geologist and you solely focus on a rock, right? You're just curious about, one kind of a major rock formation. For example, I'm sure that there is some crazy geologist out there who is obsessed with igneous rocks. And they love it, right? Everything about their life is igneous rock. They study igneous rock. They want to know how it formed, how it crumbles, what it does, where it's found, etc., right? They go home, they cosplay as an igneous rock, they sleep with an igneous rock. Like, they love that. Okay, so when you get an expert, and that would be an expert, I would classify that as an expert. Somebody who is devoting all of their time to one aspect of a huge scientific field. Now, inherently, you think, well, what's wrong with that, right? It's fine. This guy's, he's happy with igneous rocks. Let him be happy, bro. Here's the problem. You can go to that person and you can ask them about questions with respect to igneous rocks. You're going to probably get some good answers. I would imagine. You would hope. However, since that person has decided that he is going to have, or she, whatever, that they are going to have tunnel vision on a very specific part of geology, they are going to start missing out on all the other stuff that surrounds their tunnel. And that's a problem, because that tunnel visioned geologist, that expert, is now missing out on all kinds of potential data that could have potentially answered questions that he has with respect to igneous rocks. So this is why we have to be careful with experts. It's the same thing in the medical field, right? Like everything is so compartmentalized. And in fact, okay, so let's talk about this for 2 seconds. Expertise can actually be considered a concept called compartmentalization. Compartmentalization is literally designed to divide and conquer. That is literally what compartmentalization is. Now, this trick of compartmentalization is used in all aspects of government and, of course, mind control as well. In fact, compartmentalization is a huge part of psychological conditioning. I'm not going to get into any of that, but just be aware that when you're looking at the sciences and you run into a situation to where experts say, or, trust the science, or, whatever garbage sayings and slogans they have nowadays, you have to watch out. Because scientifically speaking, those people have been turned off to the other sciences and the other sciences' progress. And of course, to make matters worse, if they're a mainstream scientist, they certainly are not going to be looking at papers or evidence or whatever found by people who are outside of their little club. And we know that. That's one of the big frustrations that a lot of people have nowadays, is that most people, for example, nowadays will look at academia, and this is an average person, by the way. A lot of people will look at academia and they'll be like, that place is obviously approaching this wrong. Like it doesn't feel right. You may not actually understand that it's wrong, but your average person, I'm willing to bet, feels that something is off. And this would be one of the reasons why you find people who go into these schools and stuff, they end up failing, because they know something is wrong intrinsically. They can tell that they are not learning the right stuff, or they are being fed lies, but they just don't know how to articulate that because they don't have the information to prove the lie. So the system carries on. All right, anyway, that's how bad it is. That's what we are up against. Okay, anyway. What I want to discuss today is we're going to talk about the concept of mountain building, and we're going to see if we can understand where mountains actually come from and how they are made, but we are also going to discuss when they were made. It's because the when they were made is what is important to understanding why the Ice Age is a false idea. I don't even want to call the Ice Age a theory. It's trash. Like, it's objective trash. It's literally, it takes 2 seconds to disprove. I know I'm going to make a million episodes on this, but I'm doing that because while I could do a stupid little top 10 video and everybody would see it for 2 seconds and move on, I'm not interested in that right now. Maybe I'll do that later. But what I want everybody right now to start looking at is I want you guys to have an intrinsic understanding of the problems geologists are facing, because geologists certainly aren't going to tell you, at least most of them. And by the way, I do want to add, I am not getting down on all geologists. In fact, most of them are either innocent victims or, and then there's the innocent victim geologists, and they're out there. They're just pushing the narrative because they've been conditioned to do it. Sorry, that's the reason why. Because if they were intellectually honest with themselves, which they are no longer able to do, by the way, because that trait has been conditioned out of them. But if they were able to be intellectually and academically honest, they would see all the faults, and then of course they would be fired the next day they come into work, because you can't do that. So they're happy where they are at, and they are not going to change. Unfortunately, one of the bad things you learn when you start to get into all of this, and you see, the situation for what it truly is, it's amazing the amount of wasted potential that has happened to academia. We have lost so many people to the garbage, anyway. Then there's the geologists that are in the mainstream arena, and they're actually good. Like, they are actually questioning some aspects of, say, plate tectonics or mountain building or whatever other geological processes they're looking at. There are good ones out there, but they are rare. And I mean really rare. Every once in a while, I'll find a talk on YouTube about it. It's nice to see those guys. But like I said, they're hard to find. They're just not a lot out there. And they're not out there for the simple reasons of what I already said. Like, these people do not want to lose their jobs. It's funny, all the people that I've actually seen, the mainstream geologists that I have seen call into question a lot of this stuff, they're always older guys. They're always, late 50s or in their 50s, 60s or whatever. They are long past the entry point into academics, right? They've gone through the whole rigmarole. They've spent their time there. And to be honest, they probably do not care at that age that they could be kicked out or fired or whatever. Because at that age, who gives a crap, right? You're not trying to get into another school. You're done. So I respect those guys at least for trying. It's just unfortunate that they waited until they were like 90 years old to do it, because there's a lot of talented guys out there doing that stuff. All right, anyway, so that's the situation that we find ourselves with respect to the mainstream geological situation. Now, why do we want to discuss mountains at all in relation to the Ice Age? Well, it's simple. You can't have moving glaciers without mountains. Very simple premise. And that premise is gravity. Gravity is what causes a glacier to move. A glacier is not self-powered. It's very important to understand this. Not that I'm saying that anybody thought that a glacier, would move on its own like it's a living thing or something, but a lot of people don't understand where the basic motion is driven from, and it's simple. It's gravity. Where do the mountains come into play? Well, here's the thing. If you go look at pictures right now of glaciers, you're going to find glaciers essentially wedged in between mountain cracks or, on top of a mountain. And all of this snow that has compacted and creates the glacier is moving downwards from a sloped mountain. That's where gravity comes into play, right? The glacier is formed at the top of an incline, somewhere up high, and that would be a high energy situation. You can start getting a mass of snow. Once you get big enough, the snow is going to move because gravity is going to start to tug on it. And as gravity tugs on it, the ice is going to go down the slope and essentially move from a higher energy potential, which would be on top of a mountain, down to the lower energy potential, where the glacier will ultimately slow down and very slowly creep along. Now, the glacier can only continue to creep along if it is being supplied from the higher energy source, right? You need more stuff coming down that mountain to continue to push the glacier forward. And by the way, really quick, all of the stuff that I'm talking about right here, the concepts of how glaciers move, where, how they go down a hill, stuff like that, and other stuff we're about to talk about, this is all accepted in the mainstream, and I agree with them. This is correct. This is exactly how a glacier moves. So I'm not saying that current glaciers are not powered in this way. Powered. We will not use the term powered. That's wrong. But you know what I'm saying? Basically, the way the glaciers do operate is understood by mainstream, and I agree with them. Right? It's very important to understand that, because we're going to run into some problems once we try and figure out how the Ice Age was possible. All right, so one of the main ways that a glacier moves is it goes from a higher energy potential to a lower energy potential. Very simple physics, no problem, easy to understand. Okay. Is there anything else that can drive a glacier? Yeah, there are other processes that in theory drive the glacier. You can actually literally have, this is the one I find fun, you can actually have the glacier hydroplane and gain some of its movement. What happens is that the ice on top, as you get more and more ice pack or snowpack or whatever you want to call it, as you get more and more snowpack, the glacier is going to become heavier, right? So what happens when you have weight pushing down on that snow underneath? What happens? Friction is created. If you create friction, you create heat. By creating heat, you melt the snow a little bit, and it can actually hydroplane on that very thin little, layer of water that's being created from the meltwater. It's very fascinating. Anyway, that's another way that a glacier can be pushed along, but still, you still have to have energy coming from somewhere, and that somewhere is the mountain slope. There's other little potential aspects that can move a glacier, but they're side aspects, like deformation within the glacier itself, right? If you have a cavity or something and it collapses in on itself, that might cause a bit of a chain reaction. Same principle as a high energy state to a low energy state. Same exact situation. Anyway, there's little stuff like that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, to get the force to move that glacier along, you have to have mountains. Mountains are critical to getting glaciers to move. This is where the problem comes into play for geologists. And it's a problem you are probably not aware of. And that is the problem of the fact that mainstream geologists, please understand and realize, this is hilarious by the way, that what I am about to say is a mainstream geological position. This is not some weird, or not even weird, this is not an alternative research, this is not some place from the dark web or whatever. This is directly from mainstream geology. Over the course of the last few centuries, as geology became more and more of its own science, what was eventually discovered and the conclusion that was oddly made was that the vast majority of the mountain ranges on this planet rose to the current altitudes that they sit at in recently geological times. In fact, the mountain ranges that we find right now on planet Earth, and I'm talking about the Alps, the Andes, the Sierras, you name it, the Himalayas, whatever, all of these mountains rose up out of the ground not before the Ice Age, but after the Ice Age was over. I'll say that one more time. All of the mountain ranges that right now enjoy really tall heights, right? They have altitudes of 13,000, 16,000 feet plus. All of these mountains, they were not that high before the Ice Age. In fact, it gets even weirder. Geologists have proven that these mountain ranges were literally only little hills and bumps on the planet during the Ice Age, or during the supposed Ice Age. Starting to see the problem yet? Remember, this is a mainstream geological position. So basically, what the science shows, this is what the science shows, is that there were no mountains in existence during the multiple ice ages that apparently spread across this planet up until about 10,000 years ago. And then, about 10,000 years ago, all of these ice sheets finally officially melted. And after the ices were done melting, after the ice sheets were gone, then the mountains sprung up. This is a serious issue for anybody believing that the Ice Age is a real period in time. And in fact, it gets even funnier because it's not just one ice age that is proposed. There are multiple ice ages that have been proposed. So we run into a situation that reads like this. Somehow magically ice sheets covered huge tracts of this planet, but these huge ice sheets, gigantic glaciers essentially, had no mountains to push them anywhere, because the mountains did simply not exist. This should be horrifying and shocking to everybody out there if you are not familiar with real science. If you already know this, then, it's a reminder. But for those of you who did not know that this is what's going on in the geological realm, and I mean the mainstream realm, we're not even into the real science yet. I'm just using mainstream right now. I haven't said anything about alternative research. So we have a very serious problem. We have geologists believing that huge ice sheets were pushed across the globe. And of course, ice sheets are glaciers, which means glaciers need to have mountains to push them. If there were no mountains from which the ice could start at a higher energy potential and move to a lower one, how did the ice sheets spread? How did the ice sheets build to as tall as these people want to claim that they were? And how were they pushed along? Those are good scientific questions, aren't they? Yeah, they are. And they need answers. Here's the funnier part. So when you go and you ask geologists about this situation, guess what their response is? Their response is, and I won't quote it, but basically what they say is that the ice sheets are not glaciers. Ice sheets are completely different from glaciers. This is what the mainstream geologist will tell you. Do you see how dumb this is? Are you getting the picture yet? Do you see how ridiculous this is? Right now, mainstream geologists at first will tell you that the ice sheets are like glaciers. They're just huge glaciers that spread over the land. Then when you call them out on at least the mountain building part of it, where the hell were the mountains that would have pushed all these glaciers? You get the response of, well, I mean, they're not glaciers, bro. They're really ice sheets, and ice sheets have a completely different methodology of movement. Really? So then why do mainstream geologists keep pushing all of the glacial science and injecting it into the ice sheets? Right? It makes no sense. We've got them. Here we go. We have cornered mainstream geologists. There is a reason why the Ice Age remains a theory. At least they're not saying it's a law yet. You wait. One day, maybe within all of our lifetimes, the Ice Age might actually be made into a law. And you watch, it will be illegal for you to question the science that made it a law. Right? I promise you watch that happen. I guarantee you that's coming at some point in time in the future. This is how insane our planet is. Yes, we are in a lot of trouble. All right, anyway. So we have a problem with mainstream geology. Now, everything I just said should have opened your eyes on multiple fronts. So first of all, we're just talking about the Ice Age, and to get rid of it, we have to look at the science. And then the science says, well, you need mountains to move glaciers. But then the other science then goes to say, well, there were no mountains present during the Ice Age, at least none of the mountain ranges that we see right now. And to make matters even worse, they can actually prove that some of these mountain ranges, if they were in existence at all, were literally just rolling hills. That is not enough kinetic energy to push a worldwide ice sheet, or more to the point, a glacier. It doesn't work like that. It is an impossibility. So using mainstream science, we have already cast a legitimate scientific doubt on the Ice Age theory. Now I get it, you still believe in it, you still think it's real. So if anybody wants to prove this wrong, good luck, go out there and do it. Because right now the science is not on the people's side who are trying to promote the Ice Age. It's not there. Now, once again, if you're now asking the question again, well, how the hell are these people believing in something if even their own research disproves it? And we already know the answer to that. They have been psychologically conditioned to not ask questions. They believe the zeitgeist, and they will not deviate from it. Same problem cosmologists have with stuff like dark matter and dark energy. You are not allowed to claim that dark matter and dark energy does not exist. You're not allowed to do it. If you do it, you will lose telescope time, you will get kicked out of your university, etc. Right? You're not going to get published in that mainstream journalism thingy that you want to get published in. Not that, you shouldn't want to do that anyways, because they're all corrupt garbage. Point taken though, right? I mean, at this point in time, we can scientifically point out the fact that the concept of the Ice Age is legitimately wrong. At least with respect to real science, we can say and make the claim that the current concept of the Ice Age does not need to exist. There's no reason for it. All right, so we're going to go into more detail about the Ice Age, but the other point that really should have opened your eyes is the fact that I just told you that mountain ranges such as the Andes did not take 10 million or 100 million years to rise to 22,000 plus feet. That's one hell of an elevation, by the way, right? 22,000 feet? That's insane. But what I just made the claim of, and what mainstream science actually claims, is that those mountain ranges rose from potentially sea level all the way up to 22,000 feet only 10,000 years ago. And remember, it happened after the Ice Age. This is a serious issue because basically what that's saying is that it's like, okay, so there were no mountains during the Ice Age. That's problem number one. But then once the Ice Age goes away, suddenly 22,000 foot mountains show up on planet Earth? That's exactly what we're saying. And that is exactly what the evidence shows. Now remember, everything I've shown you so far is mainstream evidence, and they support this. Now, with respect to the mountain situation, you probably have questions. Okay, how the hell did a 22,000 foot high mountain chain appear just 10,000 years ago? That's the question. Interestingly enough, we may actually have the answer as well. And it gets even crazier because it probably did not take place 10,000 years ago, but the Andes probably rose to their current height right now, 22 plus thousand feet in the air, just a few thousand years ago. This is what the evidence actually starts to show us. Now, to make things even more crazy with respect to the Andes, I'll just stick to the Andes. We're not going to go over everything. We'll do a different show on that. I want to focus on the Ice Age. I'm trying to respect your time, but obviously I'm not doing good at that. Now, even if the 10,000 year situation was real, even if we were to listen to mainstream geologists about mountain building, the Alps, for example, they say that took place 10,000 years ago. And one of the excuses they'll try to say is they'll say, well, there were like ice sheets there, and then once they melted, the land springed back up like a sponge cake or something, and then that's where all of those features came from. That's what they believe, and I'm not going to get into that right now because it pisses me off, and I don't want to start going down to the university and choking random geologists. It's just, you start slapping them, just, don't kill me, I don't want to do that, okay? I'm not going to do that. I've sworn off slaughtering geologists. How do you like that? See, everybody can self-improve. Anyway, even if the 10,000 year geological period is true, and by the way, this 10,000 years would be fueled by the theory of uniformity, right? And the theory of uniformity requires everything takes millions and billions of years. You are probably familiar with that principle, even if you don't know the name. Anyways, so that kind of puts a weirder spin on mountain building, right? Just 10,000 years ago? That kind of makes the theory of uniformity completely wrong, right? So we see that. But what a date of 10,000 years would imply is that humans would have witnessed the rising of the Alps. That means if this was only 10,000 years ago, and in all honesty, we now know it's a lot closer to us, it's not 10,000, it's probably more along the lines of 3-ish, 4-ish thousand years ago. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Let's just use the 10,000 year date, because relatively speaking, that's still pretty close to us. That literally means that humankind probably, or not probably, but did witness the rising of the Alps. Now, if we're going to make that claim, the next thing you should ask is, well, all right, fine, but do we have any stories of that? And yeah, we do. In fact, all over this planet, we have cultures everywhere talking about how all of these mountain ranges that they were around, regardless of where you are on the planet, does not matter. They all have stories of these mountains being created literally overnight. This is the history. The history backs up the science. This is a legitimate problem. Why do we find a situation to where the geological evidence proves that mountain ranges on this planet are extraordinarily young, not only just geologically, but just relative to humans? And we also find a situation to where cultures all over this planet have a legitimate description of what happened to create said mountain ranges. This is a problem. I mean, this is a legitimate issue that is absolutely being ignored everywhere. Now that we've set the stage to give you an idea of the problems with respect to the Ice Age and how those ice sheets or glaciers would have been able to move, and now that we've shown that some of that is not possible, or at least none of it is possible, let me give you guys a couple of other perspectives. I want to start with a little Velikovsky, just to give a different perspective, and then I'll give you guys another perspective from geologists who graduated from places like Cambridge, Stanford, stuff like that. And I'll show you guys what real scientists are finding from their point of view, so you're not just thinking I'm just schizo garbage babbling about whatever. Like, everything I've said is legitimate science. So let's get into Velikovsky, and then we'll jump to the next guys if we have time. The book we are going to take a section from is called Earth in Upheaval, and it's by Immanuel Velikovsky. I cannot recommend this book enough. It will change your life. Anyway, if you're not going to read it, I will read it to you. Let's do this. This section is called
Mountain Thrusts in the Alps and Elsewhere.
The age of a rock formation is ascertained with the help of the fossils it contains. To the surprise of many scientists, it was found that mountains have traveled since older formations have been pushed over on top of younger ones. Chief Mountain in Montana is a massif standing several thousand feet above the Great Plains. It has been thrust bodily upon the much younger strata of the Great Plains, and then driven over them eastward for a distance of at least 8 miles. Indeed, the thrust may have been several times 8 miles, writes Daly. By similar thrusting, the whole Rocky Mountain front for hundreds of miles has been pushed up and then out many miles over the plains. How do you like that? Isn't that insane? These geologists are literally saying what they are finding. They are finding that all these mountains, it's not just they were ripped up, but they were ripped upwards and then carried along the continents over the older strata. What kind of an event can create that? Right? That is absolutely insane. But that's the geological evidence. All right, let's keep going. Such titanic displacements of mountains have been found in many places on the Earth. The displacement of the Alps is especially extensive. Quote, "During the building of the Alps, gigantic slabs of rock, thousands of feet thick, hundreds of miles long, and tens of miles wide, were thrust up and then over relatively to the rocks beneath. The direction of the relative overthrusting movement was from Africa toward the main mass of Europe on the north. The visible rocks of the northern Alps of Switzerland have thus been shoved northward distances of the order of 100 miles. In a sense, the Alps used to be on the present site of northern Italy." Unquote. Mount Blanc was moved from its place, and the Matterhorn was overturned. Did you ever learn about that in geology class? Did anybody ever tell you that huge chunks of these mountain ranges were literally grabbed, lifted upwards, and then dragged along entire continents? Nobody talks about this. Oh, and by the way, this dragging did not take hundreds of millions of years. They are claiming that this took place literally overnight. It was a singular event that did this. All right, let's keep going. Those portions of the Alps that surrounded the valley of the Linth in the canton of Glarus in Switzerland have lower parts of tertiary formations or of the age of mammals. Their upper parts are Permian, preceding the age of the reptiles, and Jurassic, of the age of reptiles. This implies one of two conclusions. Either the division of rocks into sequences based on the fossils they contain is fallacious, or the old mountains were moved bodily and set on the shoulders of more recent formations. The latter conclusion is chosen. And if Dr. de Saus's notion of the sea sweeping over the Alps appeared fantastic, the idea of mountains traveling considerable distances must sound even more fantastic, unless we know of a physical cause that could have brought it about. But even the very cause of mountain building itself is obscure. The problem of mountain making is a vexing one. Many of the mountains are composed of tangentially compressed and overthrust rocks that indicate scores of miles of circumferential shortening of the Earth's crust. Radial shrinkage is woefully inadequate to cause the observed amount of horizontal compression. Therein lies the real perplexity of the problem of mountain making. Geologists have not yet found a satisfactory escape from this dilemma, says F.K. Mather of Harvard University. Right? Remember, mainstream people, the mainstream evidence supports this. I haven't even started talking to you guys about what actually created the mountains. But these are the results, right? So if you don't believe me, that's fine. But even the mainstream doesn't believe all the stuff that's being taught to the average masses. It's just not happening because the evidence is not there. All right. The origin of the mountains is not explained. And still less is their thrust or shift across valleys and over other mountains. The Alps were shoved 100 miles to the north. Chief Mountain in Montana traveled across the plains and climbed the slope of another mountain and settled on top of it. Quote, all of the Glacier National Park in Montana and all the Rocky Mountain area up to the Yellowhead Pass in Alberta, unquote, moved for many miles. The mountains of western Scotland shifted from their places. The entire length of the Norwegian mountains showed a similar overthrust. What could have caused these mountains to travel across valley and uphill with their masses of granite weighing billions of tons? No force acting from inside the earth, pulling inward or pushing outward, could have created these overthrusts. Only twisting could have produced them. It could hardly have occurred if the rotation and revolution of our planet had never been disturbed. Here he mentions twisting. Torsion, or basically rotation, is extremely important when we talk about energy transference, plasma, etc. Right? When you look at a Birkeland current, for example, what's a Birkeland current doing? Right? It's a coaxial rotating, band of plasma and electricity. Right? It is literally a moving torsion field, I guess you could technically call it. Think about DNA. What's DNA? DNA is in a double helix spiral. It's torsioned, right? It rotates, it spins downward. torsion is important, rotation is important. And these concepts are not really discussed when you get down to a lot of this stuff. But the fact that right here, Velikovsky is calling out, hey, look, the geological evidence shows that the Earth must have been twisted by some sort of external force to produce the kinds of mountains that we are seeing. And this is just what the evidence leads us to. Now, of course, the major question is, what the hell has that much power to literally twist the Earth? On a side note, torsion or rotation is extraordinarily important for all of you anti-gravity people, right? This is something that the Nazi scientists figured out with der Glocke, the bell, right? Rotation, rotation, rotation. This is extremely important to understanding the flow of plasma and electricity. All right, I'm not going to get into all of that. Anyway, very fascinating scientific stuff here. When was the last time you took a geology class and they went into the physics of torsion, right? Of twisting and why that would happen? What is going on with that? Anyway, that's what we find geologically. Now, the main problem that we see here is that the Earth does not have enough power on its own to create any kind of a geological situation like this. It would have had to have been external. This, of course, flies in the face of the theory of uniformity, by the way, right? Because at the end of this this section that I just read for a second there, he points out the fact that you cannot get this kind of a twisting of the mantle simply by having the Earth essentially take millions and billions of years to do anything. Something had to have happened to the rotation and revolution of Earth to create this kind of geological phenomena. Mainstream science has no way of dealing with this because mainstream science does not believe that any process that is not currently taking place on Earth now could have happened in the past, or even the recent past, let alone the ancient past. It's insane, right? These guys have no... All right, let's keep going. In the Alps, caverns with human artifacts of stone and bone dating from the Pleistocene. The Pleistocene is the Ice Age period, just so everybody knows. We're going to hear the Pleistocene used a lot by mainstream geologists. Anyways, that's the Ice Age. All right, moving on. These have been found at remarkably high altitudes. During the Ice Age, the slopes and valleys of the Alps, more than any other parts of the continent, must have been covered by glaciers. Today in Central Europe, there are great glaciers only in the Alps. The presence of men at high altitudes during the Pleistocene or the Paleolithic seems baffling. The cavern at Wildkirchley, near the top of Ebenalp, is 4,900 feet above sea level. It was occupied by man sometime during the Pleistocene. Quote, even more remarkable in respect to the altitude is the cavern of Drachenloch at a height of 2,445 meters, or 8,028 feet. Unquote, near the top of Drachenberg, south of Ragaz. This is a steep, snow-covered massif. Quote, both of these stations are in the very heart of the alpine field of glaciation. Unquote. Basically, they're wondering how the hell there are human artifacts in these areas when these areas should have been covered in literally thousands of feet of ice. How was that possible? All right. A continental ice sheet thousands of feet thick filled the entire valley between the Alps and the Jura, where now Lake Geneva lies, to the height of the erratic boulders torn from the Alps and placed on the Jura Mountains. In the same geological epoch, between two advances of the ice cover, during an interglacial intermission, human beings must have occupied caverns 8,000 feet above sea level. No satisfactory explanation for such location of Stone Age man has ever been offered. Yeah, so that's one of the problems. So when we start to look all over the world, we find human habitation way up high in these mountains, right? In over there in the Andes, we find Machu Picchu that's almost 8,000 feet up in the air. How the hell did anyone build Machu Picchu way the hell up there? I mean, that's a legitimate problem that has not been solved. Do not listen to the mainstream. We still don't know who built that. And in fact, if you listen to the local legends, that actually gets really interesting because they claim that somebody very specific built it. I'm not going to get into that here, but mainstream is not listening to them because the locals' claims or the locals' histories, yeah, it gets a little different, and it kind of destroys a lot of mainstream history. All right, anyway, but we find that, we find these habitations way up high in the mountains. How the hell did they get up there? Like, what's going on? Why? Why would you even go up that high anyway? There's literally no reason, at least initially, when you look around, to ever go up 8,000 feet into mountains that suck to travel in, by the way. This is not an easy climb, right? Especially back in the day when there was no roads leading to it like that, or no paved roads or no dirt roads, to the extent that we have now anyway. That stuff did not exist. Whoever those people were who built Machu Picchu, for example, that's a weird situation. And it has not been answered satisfactorily from a scientific perspective, and certainly not from a historical perspective, at least the mainstream. Anyway, we find these civilizations up high. The real question is why? How did they get up there? Even more interesting is that, like I said, the local legends, they talk about who were potentially responsible for building Machu Picchu. Those stories also contain the origin of the Andes Mountains. They actually, not only do they know who built Machu Picchu, but they have stories of how the mountains were uplifted overnight, right? I'm not going to get into that right now. We'll do that later. But that exists, and that is ignored by the mainstream. Why? Well, because that goes against everything that a mainstream historian and scientist would ever be able to believe, because the stories, they sound crazy initially. All right, let's go. Let's keep moving. Could it be that the mountains rose as late as in the age of man and carried up with them the caverns of early man? In recent years, evidence has grown rapidly to show, in contrast to previous opinions, that the Alps and other mountains rose and attained their present heights and also traveled long distances in the age of man. Quote, mountain uplifts amounting to many thousands of feet have occurred within the Pleistocene epoch itself. Unquote. This occurred with the Cordilleran mountain system in both North and South America, the Alps, Caucasus, Central Asian system, and many others. The fact that the late upthrust of the major ridges of the world created, when recognized, great perplexity among geologists who, under the weight of much evidence, were forced to this view. The revision of the concepts is not always radical enough. Not only in the age of man, but in the age of historical man, mountains were thrust up. Valleys were torn out, lakes were dragged uphill and emptied. Helmut Gams and Rolf Nordhagen brought together very extensive material concerning the Bavarian Alps and the Tyrol, or Eastern Alps. The great mountain chains challenge credibility by their extreme youth, wrote the explorer Bailey Willis about Asian mountains. Now the next section goes into the Himalayas, and you know what? I'm just going to keep going. So this is really great, just basic ground building, foundational information that is really hopefully going to give you enough ammo to go out on your own and to continue to build upon what we're talking about here. Remember, all of this is science. We're just citing scientific sources. And this has been going on for a while. Remember, Velikovsky did not write this 5 years ago. They had this figured out back in the 50s, like even before that. That's how crazy the evidence is to support the claim that mountain ranges only rose up in the past 3, 4, 5,000 years. Right? That's how crazy the evidence is. I don't know what to tell people. It's like right there. If you don't, if you choose to ignore it, fair enough. But at the same time, that's not science. We can't. Okay, all right, let's keep going. This next section is called the Himalayas. The Himalayas, highest mountains in the world, rise like a 1,000-mile-long wall north of India. This mountain wall stretches from Kashmir in the west to and beyond Bhutan in the east, with many of its peaks towering over 20,000 feet, and Mount Everest reaching 29,000 feet, or over 5 miles. The summits of these lofty massifs are capped by eternal snow in those regions of the heavens where eagles do not fly, nor any other bird of the sky. Scientists of the 19th century were dismayed to find that, as high as they climbed, the rocks of the massifs yielded skeletons of marine animals, fish that swim in the ocean, and shells of mollusks. This was evidence that the Himalayas had risen from beneath the sea. At some time in the past, azure waters of the ocean streamed over Mount Everest, carrying fish, crabs, and mollusks, and marine animals looked down to where now we look up, and where man, after many unsuccessful efforts, has until now succeeded only once in putting his feet. Remember, this was written back in the 50s, right? So, yeah. Until recently, it was assumed that the Himalayas rose from the bottom of the sea to their present height tens or perhaps hundreds of millions of years ago. Such a long period of time, so long ago, was enough even for the Himalayas to have risen to their present height. Do we not, when we tell young listeners in a story about giants and monsters, begin with, quote, "Once upon a time, long, long ago," unquote, and the giants are no longer threatening, and the monsters are no longer real? Basically, what he is saying is that geologists use the theory of uniformity, and they throw the mountain creation situation billions of years back in time. Well, in this case, hundreds of millions of years back in time. Once you do that, you create a disassociative state. You are so detached from the process that you are discussing that it becomes very difficult to truly take it as seriously as it needs to be taken, and you immediately, like I said, you disassociate. So if you've disassociated yourself from a process, you are never going to be able to truly understand and figure that process out. That is exactly what happens, right? That's why the theory of uniformity is so popular, because all of these different scientists can utilize millions and billions of years, and then they don't have to explain any of their theories anymore, because they can simply say, I cannot prove it to you because it happened 100 million years ago. That's not going to work. So basically what we're seeing is that on the mountain peaks of the Himalayas, we are finding ocean life. That's a problem. Geologists say that yes, over billions of years they rose up from the ocean. But is that really what happened? Let's keep going. According to general geological scheme, 500 million years ago, the first forms of life appeared on Earth. 200 million years ago, life developed into reptilian forms that dominated the scene, achieving gigantic size. I'm assuming that would be like the dinosaurs. The huge reptiles died out 70 million years ago, and mammals occupied the Earth. They belonged to the Tertiary. According to this scheme, the last mountain uplifts took place at the end of the Tertiary, during the Pliocene, This period lasted until a million years ago, when the Quaternary period, the Age of Man, began. The Quaternary is also the time of the Ice Age, or the Pleistocene, the Paleolithic, or Old Stone Age, and the very end of the Quaternary, since the end of the Ice Age, is called Recent Time. Recent time would be referring to ages like the Neolithic, the Bronze, and Iron Ages, basically. All right. Since the appearance of man on Earth, or since the beginning of the Ice Age, there have been no uplifts on any substantial scale. In other words, we have been told the profile of the Earth with its mountains and oceans was already established when man first appeared. In the last few decades, however, numerous facts have emerged from mountains and valleys that tell a different story. In Kashmir, Helmut de Terra discovered sedimentary deposits of an ancient sea bottom that was elevated at places to an altitude of 5,000 feet or more and tilted at an angle of as much as 40 degrees. The basin was dragged up by the rise of the mountain. The tilted watermarks that we find on all kinds of mountains at high elevations is a real problem for geologists. The reason why is simple, is because why do we find heavily tilted water lines that are dated to very young, way up high in the air where there is no way there could ever be water to make the line? Right? That immediately insinuates that the land had to have been lower. It had to have been closer to sea level to where it would have been able to have this kind of an environment to essentially be underwater to create that kind of a line. And to make matters even worse, when you start looking at the multiple tilt lines, oh dude, it's all right. Anyway, let's keep going. I'm sure they'll probably talk about it here. We find that up in the Andes a lot as well. Lake Titicaca has that problem. You can see the tilt of the original water line. Something happened to that lake that literally shifted that mountain downward at an angle. And of course, the water line, the new water line, matches this, and it exposed the tilted water line. Some crazy stuff happened back in the day, and that is the kind of proof that we find that inevitably shows us that, yeah, we have to pay attention to it, because this kind of evidence does not line up with mainstream geological outlooks. Okay, I know, I'm just babbling. Let's go. But this was entirely unexpected, the water lines. Quote, "These deposits contain Paleolithic fossils," unquote. And this, according to Arnold Heim, Swiss geologist, would make it plausible that the mountain passes in the Himalayas may have risen in the age of man, 3,000 feet or more. Quote, "However fantastic changes so extensive may seem to a modern geologist," unquote. Studies on the Ice Age in India and associated human cultures, published in 1939 by de Terra, working for the Carnegie Institution, with the assistance of Professor T.T. Patterson of Harvard University, is one long argument and demonstration that the Himalayas were arising during the glacial age and reached their present heights only after the end of the glacial age, and actually in historical times. From other mountain ridges came similar reports. De Terra divided the Ice Age of the Kashmir slopes of the Himalayas into Lower Pleistocene, embracing the first glacial and interglacial stages, Middle Pleistocene, the second major glaciation and the following interglacial, and the Upper Pleistocene, comprising the last two glaciations and an interglacial stage. Remember, the Ice Age is not just one Ice Age. The mainstream has now had to create multiple different Ice Ages to explain away all of the evidence that has been discovered all over this planet that was used to support the ridiculous notion of an ice age. Right now they're at a point to where they have to say that literally glaciers formed at the equator and spread outward from the equator. How do you like that? Like, that's how crazy, man, mainstream, they have some serious coping issues. All right, anyway. The scenery which this region presented at the beginning of the Pleistocene must have differed greatly from that of our time. The Kashmir Valley was less elevated, and its southern rampart, the Pir Panjal, lacked that alpine grandeur that enchants the traveler today. Then various formation groups moved both horizontally and vertically, resulting in a southward displacement of older rocks upon foreland sediments, accompanied by uplift of the mobile belts. The main Himalayas suffered sharp uplift, in consequence of which the Kashmir lake beds were compressed and dragged upward on the slope of the most mobile range. Uplift was accompanied by a southward shifting of the Pir Panjal block toward the foreland of northwestern India, unquote. The Pir Panjal massif that was pushed toward India is at present 15,000 feet high. This is no joke, by the way. I know, geology, people throw around, millions of years and thousands of feet, blah, blah, blah. This is insane. I mean, the claim is literally 15,000 foot high mountains were shifted across the land. Not only shifted across it, but literally pulled up and then drug over other land. Like that's just absolutely insane. I mean, the fact that geologists completely ignore that. I mean, and the evidence is right here. I mean, this is mainstream geology making these claims, right? And we only have more evidence now to support this stuff. Okay. In the beginning of this period, the fauna was greatly impoverished, but thereafter, judging from remains, large cats, elephants, true horses, pigs, and hippopotami occupied the area. In the Middle Pleistocene, or the Ice Age, there was a continued uplift. The archaeological records prove that early Paleolithic man inhabited the adjoining plains. Daterra refers to abundance of Paleolithic sites. Man used stone implements of flake form, like those found in the Cromer forest bed in England. Then, once more, the Himalayas were pushed upwards. Tilting the terraces and the lacustrine beds indicates a continued uplift of the entire Himalayan tract during the last phases of the Ice Age. In the last stages of the Ice Age, when man worked stone in the mountains, he might have been living in the Bronze Stage down in the valleys. It has been repeatedly admitted by various authorities, quoted subsequently in this book, that the end of the glacial epoch may have been almost contemporaneous with the time of the rise of the great cultures of antiquity, of Egypt and Sumeria, and it follows also of India and China. How do you like that? Mainstream is even willing to admit that the end of the Ice Age was still happening while these major cultures, that the mainstream historians have all wrong, by the way, but they're willing to admit that they're synonymous. When was the last time you were taught that Egypt was synonymous with the Ice Age? You aren't taught that. And the reason why is because nobody wants this kind of stuff being discussed, because it completely destroys everything that the mainstream right now holds dear. That is the level of insanity that we are dealing with. All right. The Stone Age in some regions could have been contemporaneous with the Bronze Age in others. Even now, there are numerous tribes in Africa, Australia, and Tierra del Fuego, that southern tip of the Americas, still living in the Stone Age. and many other regions of the modern world would have remained in the Stone Age had it not been for the importation of iron from more advanced regions. The Aborigines of Tasmania never got so far as to produce a polished Neolithic stone implement, and in fact barely entered the crudest Stone Age. This large island south of Australia was discovered in 1642 by Abel Tasman. The last Tasmanian died in exile in 1876, and the race became extinct. Man, it's funny. I don't think a lot of people truly appreciate how many human races no longer exist. And they're either completely extinct due to all kinds of reasons, regular war with each other. But the reality is, it's all of these catastrophes that either completely wiped out some of these some of the genetic lineages of these older humans. Like, they just wiped them out clean. The catastrophes did not take prisoners, essentially. Very few people were left, and we literally see the complete annihilation of populations of certain races. And then, of course, we see other races which were annihilated almost to the point of extinction, but, at the end of the day, even though they still survived the catastrophes, there was just too many of them gone, and they slowly dwindled away and went extinct. It's crazy when you start to look at genetic dead ends and you start to look at all the various mixings that have happened in the past. It's a whole level of insanity, and really goes a long way to proving, the catastrophism is real. Like, it's hilarious. Every single science that exists on this planet literally proves catastrophism. Okay, you get it. All right. The more recent uplifts in the Himalayas took place also in the age of modern man. Quote, the post-glacial terrace records the more recent uplifts in the Himalayas took place also in the age of modern man. The post-glacial terrace record suggests that there was at least one prominent post-glacial advance of ice. And this, in the eyes of De Terra and Patterson, is indicative of a diastrophic movement of the mountains. We must be empathetic on one particular feature, namely the dependence of Pleistocene glaciation on the diastrophic character of a mobile mountain belt. This relationship, we feel, has not been sufficiently recognized in any other glacial regions, such as Central Asia and the Alps, where similar, if not identical, conditions are found. It had been generally assumed that loess, thin wind-blown dust that is built into clays, very thin layer, is a product of a glacial age. However, in the Himalayas, De Terra reported finding Neolithic or polished stone implements in loess and commented, quote, of importance for us is the fact that loess formation was not restricted to the glacial age, but that it continued into the post-glacial times, unquote. In China, in Europe too, the presence of polished stone artifacts in loess prompted a similar revision. The Neolithic stage that began, according to the accepted scheme, basically mainstream trash, at the end of the Ice Age still persisted in Europe and in many other places at the time when, in the centers of civilization, the Bronze Age was already flourishing. Yeah, doesn't that put a different spin on all this? Yeah. R. Finstwalder, exploring the Nanga Parbat Massif in the western Himalayas, 26,000 feet high, dated the Himalayan glaciation as post-glacial. In other words, the expansion of the glaciers in the Himalayas took place much closer to our time than had been previously assumed. Great uplifts of the Himalayas took place in part after the time designated as the Ice Age, or only a few thousand years ago. Heim, investigating the mountain ranges of western China adjacent to Tibet and cast to the Himalayas, came to the conclusion that they had been elevated since the glacial age. Look at this. Like when real scientists are out there and just looking at the objective evidence, objectively, when you just objectively go over the evidence, these are the conclusions that you have no choice but to come to. I mean, it's right there. There's nothing to argue about, right? You can physically go touch and see all of this evidence. And there's all kinds of pictures online too. You don't have to take my word for it, right? This is what exists, but this is the stuff that is not being taught to anybody. You don't even get a taste of this, right? If mainstream geologists were academically and intellectually being honest, they would have shown all this information. They would have said, hey, look, we have this one uniformitarianism idea, but we also have evidence for another idea which is completely supported by real science. We don't get that. So all of this probably is is brand new to you, or maybe it's a refresher, but it's not in the mainstream, right? Like none of this stuff is talked about. And gee, I wonder why. I wonder why they would hide our history from us, right? Because the implications of mountains being risen up only 10,000, if not earlier, years ago, it changes everything. It completely changes all of humanity. It completely makes history go in a completely different route that is probably not going to be beneficial to the people up top. Okay, let's keep going. The Great Massif of the Himalayas rose to its present height in the age of modern, actually historical man. The highest mountains in the world are also the youngest. With their topmost peaks, the mountains have shattered the entire scheme of the geology of the long, long ago. That sends a chill down my spine every time I hear this stuff. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. We are taught something completely different, but when you look at the evidence in an objective, scientific manner, everything changes. I mean, everything changes. Right? If these mountains rose only a few thousand years ago, that begs the question, what the hell was going on just a few thousand years ago? The good news is that we have the answer to this. We have the scientific answer, and we have the eyewitness accounts from our ancestors. I'm not going to go into all that right now because we've gone on way longer than I wanted to, and I didn't even get to everything I wanted to. So we'll call it here for mountain building. We'll go over more of the mountain building as we continue to build our case for getting rid of the Ice Age. But, I know I know I could probably just make a quick bullet point list and you could go about your day. But here's the deal. I want you guys to see all of the details because it's not just the Ice Age we're getting rid of. I think I've already said it. But all of these scientific points, they can be used to support other concepts in history, right? There are other problems that we have when we are trying to put together the chronological timeline. I think that's like oxymoron. Anyway, no, that's oxymoron. It's the same thing. What the hell is it synonym? I don't know. My point is that, when we look at all of this stuff, this evidence has the potential to change a lot of historical mankind. Right here, what you're seeing geologists literally saying, hey, look, there were civilizations, advanced civilizations going, right? Like, for example, I'll just say ancient Egypt. It's not quite that simple because we don't really know who the hell ancient Egyptians were and what was going on. But anyways, from a mainstream perspective, right, major civilizations were literally already in existence when these mountains rose. That's a problem for historians because historians don't talk about this. What's ironic is that the histories that historians ignore, the legends, the mythologies, the religions that historians want nothing to do with, literally record the events that would have brought about the creation of these mountain ranges. It's right there. You know, I don't know what to tell people. It's like, it's right in front of your face. The only reason why you don't see it is because you have been conditioned not to, right? That's a testimony to the power of psychological conditioning. I can show you something physically right in front of your face, but I can also train you to not see it. And you will not see it if I don't want you to. Time to break out of that stuff, you guys. Like, it's time to move on. I know I do other shows about that stuff, and nobody, you know, I get that they're not popular because nobody wants to hear this, but I don't do it because I like to hear myself talk, obviously, right? I do it because we got to get out of this stuff. We've got to break free and start looking at the world through objective eyes, right? You've been trained to keep your eyes closed. That's a fact. There's no arguing that. I can prove that scientifically in a matter of seconds, right? Your entire life is like that. I'm not getting down on anybody, by the way. I'm just pointing out the problems that we all have. Me too. I'm right there with all of you, so don't worry. I am, okay, anyway. Let's end this. You guys, okay, we're done. So we'll do more about mountain building, but to recap, the point of this whole video was to show that, you know, the ice age, the ice sheets, the glaciers are reliant on mountains to create that kind of a situation. The problem is that when we look at the mountains themselves, we find that they did not exist. So how can you have glaciers that would have used mountains to propel them if the mountains were not there? That's the question, right? So we can get rid of the ice age. All right. Now, I'm not, all right, you know, okay, we're done. I'm done. I'm finished with this. You get it. Go do something else with your life.